Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action. Welcome, everybody, to the Movie Marquee. Today on the Marquee is the Sydney Pollack 1970s spy thriller, 3 Days of the Condor. And of course, I'm Ted, and you can always rely on the old spy fucker. And with me are my two co-hosts, Ken.
I'm not going to any alley with you or anybody. And the Wall Street Journal.
I didn't ask you to go into an alley, but okay.
Such language from you gentlemen. Such language.
I know. Potty mouths. And Eric.
You think not getting caught in a lie is the same thing as telling the truth.
Well, that's very true as well.
Keeps my marriage going.
Well,
it did up until this podcast.
I'm just kidding.
All right, for 3 Days of the Condor, Eric, do you have the particulars?
That I do, Ted. We are going to be reviewing the 1975 release, 3 Days of the Condor, directed by, of course, Sydney Pollack, based on the 1974 novel 6 Days of the Condor. Looks like the movie was condensed to 3 days by James Grady. This movie was released in 1975, September 25th, 1975. Had a budget of about $7.8 million. The gross revenue in the States here was about $27.5 million, and worldwide it was about $42 million. The movie stars Robert Redford as Joe Turner, Faye Dunaway as Kathy Hale, Max von Sydow as Jobert, Cliff Robertson as Higgins, John Houseman as Mr. Wabash, Addison Powell as Leonard Atwood, and Michael Caine, not the Michael Caine, a different Michael Caine, as Wicks.
So, Eric, what did the critics have to say about 3 Days of the Condor?
You know, the critics were pretty much all over the place on this one. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a certified fresh score of 87% with an audience score of about 83%. Roger Ebert of the Sun-Times, our favorite go-to there, gave it 3.5 stars. He said it's a well-made thriller, tense and involving, and the scary thing, in these months after Watergate, is that it's all too believable. Of course, his review was done right after the movie is released. IGN said 3 Days of the Condor is a classic spy thriller. It remains just as relevant and thrilling today as it did in 1975. It's a film built around political metaphors and pessimism, trends that continue to spiral and evolve throughout our culture, even today, with events unfolding that oddly mimic the film's once outlandish plot. Adam Lowe's at Cineview says, add to the mix gregarious powerhouse producer Dino De Laurentiis, plus regular Redford directorial collaborator Sydney Pollack, and unsurprisingly, the resulting film is a cracking thriller. The New York Times says it's fast, vivid, espionage, betrayal thriller, a dandy plot. TV Guide said it's a thrilling pseudo-expose on the corrupt inner workings of covert organizations. Variety magazine said the film is a perfect contemporary example of an old studio formula approach to filmmaking, basically a B grade. It has been elevated in form, but not in substance. Via 4 bigger names, location shooting, and more production values, sometimes the trick works, but not here. Time magazine said it's a piece of dotty, slightly paranoid intrigue. 3 Days of the Condor promises little and keeps its word. It's a hard to get indignant about it or enthusiastic either. Newsweek says, as a straight thriller, Condor comes down to thrills that work and thrills that don't. The New Yorker magazine says Sydney Pollack doesn't have a knack for action pulp. He gets some tension going in the expense spy thriller, but there's no real fun in it. And the Reader magazine said basically, the film is a throwback to the 1960s anti-Bonds spy thriller. Except, here's the genre's annihilating irony has been replaced by Pollack's liberal piousness. And we can always get into politics of Sydney Pollack and Robert Redford. They're a little bit on the liberal side. That's it. That's where I'm ending it.
So what we can garner from this is that the CIA has infiltrated Time magazine, right?
Yes, the CIA has infiltrated Time magazine, as they did the New York Times at the end of the movie. Spoiler plot there. So the review is obviously skewed.
Yeah, so that's exactly why Time decided to take a gigantic poop on the movie.
I think a lot of the reviews were based on the 1975 release, and some of them were reviews that were done a little bit later. I'm actually, in reading some of these reviews, I was really surprised, honestly, that Rotten Tomatoes score was that high for the audience and for the reviews. I really didn't think it was going to be the 80s.
Well, I was curious as to that as well, but you had mentioned in there IGN, and that's a relatively new, it's more of an internet publication
IGN loved
type
it.
of thing. So yeah, I have a feeling some of the reviews that's elevated it have probably kept it our relatively recent fashion. So Ken, can you give us a plot for 3 Days of the Condor?
Yeah, one man goes out to get lunch. The rest of them are out to lunch. The end of the movie.
Well, that's very concise and not all that not accurate.
All right, here goes. 3 Days of the Condor. Joe Turner is a bookish CIA analyst, codename Condor. He works undercover with 6 other staff members. They examine books, newspapers, and magazines from around the world. Turner files a report to CIA headquarters on a thriller novel with strange plot elements. Despite poor sales, it has been translated into many languages. Turner leaves through a back door to get the staff some lunches. Turner returns to find his co-workers dead. Frightened, he grabs a gun and exits the building. He contacts the CIA's headquarters from a phone booth and is given instructions to meet Wicks, the head of his department, who will bring him in safely. Turner insists that Wicks brings somebody familiar. Since Condor has never met his department head, Wicks brings Sam Martin, a college friend of Turner's, who is also a non-field employee of the CIA. Wicks attempts to kill Turner, who wounds his superior before escaping. Wicks kills Turner's friend to eliminate a witness. Taken into the hospital, Wicks blames Turner for both shootings before his own life support system is turned off by an intruder. Turner encounters a woman, Kathy Hale, and forces her to take him to her apartment. He holds Hale hostage while he attempts to figure out what is happening. Hale slowly comes to trust Turner, and then they have sex. Jobert, a European who had led the massacre of Turner's co-workers, finds Turner and spends some tense moments in an elevator with him. After Turner leaves the building, Jobert tries to shoot him, but Turner manages to blend into a small crowd. Soon after, a hitman disguised as a mailman arrives at Hale's apartment, but Turner manages to kill him. No longer trusting anyone within the company, Turner plays a cat-and-mouse game with Higgins, who is the deputy director of the CIA's New York division. With Hale's help, Turner abducts Higgins, who identifies Jobert as a freelance assassin who has undertaken assignments for the CIA. Back at his office, Higgins discovers that the mailman who attacked Turner worked for Jobert on a previous operation. Meanwhile, Turner discovers Jobert's location by utilizing his training to trace a phone call. Turner also learns the name and address of Leonard Atwood, who is a CIA Deputy Director of Operations for the Middle East. Turner confronts Atwood at his mansion and interrogates him at gunpoint, and learns that Turner's original report filed to the CIA headquarters had provided links to a rogue operation to seize Middle Eastern oil fields. Fearful of its disclosure, Atwood privately orders Turner's section to be eliminated. As Atwood confirms this, Jobert kills the CIA deputy director. Atwood's superiors had hired Jobert to stage the suicide of someone who was about to become an embarrassment, overriding Atwood's original contract for Jobert to kill Turner. Jobert suggests that the resourceful Turner leave the country and even become an assassin himself. Turner rejects the suggestion, but heeds to Jobert's warning that the CIA will try to eliminate him as another embarrassment, possibly entrapping him through a trusted acquaintance. Back in New York, Turner meets with Higgins near Times Square. Higgins describes the oil field plan as a contingency game that was planned within the CIA without approval from above. Turner points to the New York Times building and says that he has told them a story. Higgins is dismayed, asking Turner, "What have you done?" He then tells Turner that he is about to become a very lonely man, and he questions whether Turner's whistleblowing will really be published. As Condor turns away, Higgins calls out, "How do you know?" The end.
And they all live happily ever after.
Yeah, right. So normally we would start off here by saying if we remembered when we seen the movie for the first time. This is kind of a unique situation that we find ourselves in because both Ken and I hadn't seen the movie. So Eric, do you know when the first time you saw 3 Days of the Condor?
Anywhere between 10 or 15 years ago, I started buying all the Sydney Pollack films for the collection because he is one of my favorite directors. So I probably saw this 10, 15 years ago when I bought the DVD, and I'll probably watch it maybe once a year just to keep up on it and always find little new things here and there.
And I like to do the same thing with the directors that I like. I try to get all of their movies as well. This is an interesting movie for me, having just seen it. And then I've watched it a few times, of course, in preparation. And the initial watch that I did for the movie, I was really, really on the fence about whether or not I liked the movie. As we go through our discussion here today, I think you're going to see that I think I've come around on the movie. How about you, Ken?
Very similar. First time I watched it, I actually called Ted about 20-something minutes into the flick, and I'm like, oh my God. End it now, basically, is what I was saying to Ted.
The movie or your life?
I think both.
Okay.
Basically from watching this movie. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what the problem for this movie for me to start with, and before we get into real detail, that I heard the trailer to this movie. The trailer was very exciting. There was a level of expectation that I had for this movie based on that trailer that wasn't met when I first watched the movie.
You know, it's funny you say that, Ken, because I just recently watched the original trailer as I was reviewing the movie. And you're absolutely right. The trailer does kind of make it look like more of an action, a political spy thriller with a lot more action in it. And it is kind of a letdown as compared to the trailer. So I agree with you there.
That's a very good point. Let's start our discussion, especially with the meat of the movie. This is a spy movie. They all work for the CIA, and there's a lot of internal intrigue that goes along with this. We'll start here. It's not fair to ask whether or not the movie stands up because
It doesn't.
The technology has leaps and bounds.
You have to watch this movie with 1975 eyes on. Clearly, you're right.
Right. People from our generation, the Generation X, and possibly the first part of the millennial generation, will understand a lot of the technical aspects for the movie. It's not really fair to ask if it stands up. Do you see any problems with the plot?
One of the problems I have, I guess, is, and this is initially from when I was watching it early on and even up until today, is for someone who's just watching this movie, and I have to admit, the movie is dated. You do have to watch it with your 1975 goggles on. The actors are really what you're watching this movie for in the plot. But the job that they do is a little confusing up front. It really is. You're like, the first 20 minutes of the movie, 15 minutes, you're like, what the hell do they do for the CIA? It was very confusing.
Right.
Conversations that he has with his coworkers and the coworkers have with each other make a lot more sense if you watch the movie a second time.
Yes.
Because you're picking up on those lines, and now you're starting to figure out. Initially, when I watched it, I'm like, what the hell do they even do? They just read stuff, and that's it? I mean, it was very, very difficult to understand. But as you watch it, you're like, okay, now I understand. The plot is kind of intrigued with what they are doing, and you kind of have to watch the whole movie all the way through. Your question was, are there issues with the plot itself?
Do you think it's a coherent and complete story from beginning to end?
Not on the first watch. And I think this was what Eric is saying. This is how I feel about the movie. They do not give you enough information at the beginning. For me, it kind of lures you to sleep. So when the plot is brought to you, you're kind of missing some of the stuff already because they don't really give you enough information about it. They're very so vague about it. It's like some information that I don't even think that's important information. And then it isn't until the next time I watch it that I'm like, oh, right there, they had mentioned something about him being a phone op.
His military background and stuff.
They had mentioned that he did some work with phones. I didn't even think about that because of the way he was just reading it off of a piece of paper, and then it's, they don't really dwell on it, and then I forget about it, and then it's not till I watch it again, I'll be like, oh, it just seems like that's where some of the problems with lining the plot together throughout the movie is. It's hard to piece the things together because they're not really blatantly showing you the pieces.
The real main issue with the plot, in my opinion, is first off, you don't really know what did he find in this book that he read that he sent to his superiors, that they sent documentation back that related to Atwood trying to take over the Middle East for oil. what was really in that book. It's not explained very well as to what he found that set everyone off where they wanted to liquidate the whole staff, in my opinion.
That's definitely one of the things that had come to my mind. But going back to what Ken had said, I completely had the same experience the first time watching the movie.
Anyone would.
Because they're important plot points that are literally just like one or two lines. And if for whatever reason you miss those lines, because I completely missed the first time, I completely missed the fact that he had worked for, I heard that he worked for the Signal Corps, but I completely missed the part where he had worked for the phone company. And then watching it the second time, it's like, okay, now it makes sense as to why he was able to do what he did later on in the movie. It just seems all of the players, they're not really fleshed out and established as to who all of the players are. We have Robert Redford's character, who we know because he's Robert Redford, that he's the main character. But like you had said, Eric, we're not exactly sure what he does there. We know that he reads everything because throughout the movie, everybody says he reads everything. It's the most repeated line in the whole movie. So we know that, but actually what they're doing is like super interesting. They're like creating the first Google because people will use what they're inputting to search by terms for allusions to these different covert operations going on around the world. So what they're actually doing is actually super cool and super interesting.
And they could have probably made it a little bit more super cool and super interesting in that first 15 minutes. Kind of like, okay, what's going on? It really didn't pick up for me until I love that cloak and dagger stuff. When he's making the phone call, all the code names and all the stupid little, cleanup and, the janitor and all that. I love all that cloak and dagger stuff, which for me, it really picked up with the movie. But the first 15, yeah, I'll admit, it was slow.
It doesn't take that time to establish who our players are.
And that makes it confusing for it later on, because when it gets more interesting, when you do the cloak and dagger, at least for the first time, like me and Ted watched it, it got confusing. It wasn't interesting to me because I'm like, wait, how does he know how to do that? Why are we here? We just don't know enough here because there's not enough established, or they gloss over it so minor that you have to watch it multiple times to understand where we're at. So I couldn't even enjoy it the first time around because I was utterly confused as to where we're at by the last third of the movie.
And being 4 times into watching it, I still am not really sure whether or not Higgins was part of the original plot that was set forward to kill all those members of that particular
No, I don't
section.
think he was. Wick was working on his own with that one.
That's part of what I was getting at as well, is that those characters aren't fleshed out. We're not everything is kind of shadowy, and I get that that's part of what they're trying to do. The fact that it's the CIA and the CIA shadowy, and they're of course they're the bad guys and blah blah blah. That's standard trope, but this is probably one of the first movies to use the CIA as the boogeyman, so to speak.
I will say this with Higgins, when he's like trying to connect the dots, when he's in that room with the 2 other look like analysts, he's trying to figure out the relationship between, I think, Jobert and
the mailman.
That's when I believe he wasn't part of the hit, when he pieces those together. But like I said, the first time around, especially watching it, it's really hard to know what he's doing in that room or what anybody's doing, really, except for maybe Robert Redford's character. Everybody else I have no clue who they are and what they do. When we got to the end of the movie and they basically kill Atwood, I'm like, who is he? I didn't really know who he was.
And that's kind of where I was left a little bit as well. And even in the first 15 minutes, you have to be very astute and you're watching to understand that, because of the first time I barely caught the fact that Robert Redford's character and is it Janice? Or
yes.
Janet, that they're
a couple.
An item. Yeah, they're a couple. Because I was confused when he goes over to his friend's apartment, his friend who had been shot, and his wife, then she asked if Janet was there. And it's like, okay, so they were an item. That was another thing. There seemed to be like there could have been some more meat on the bone for some of those characters. The interesting part here is how Faye Dunaway's character comes into this movie.
Yeah.
And this is probably... I don't know how you guys feel. I know how I feel. I feel kind of icky about how she comes into the story and then her involvement into the story. If this was 6 days of the Condor, where you have a period of time where he's essentially, I guess you, for the lack of a better term, he kidnaps her.
Like a Stockholm syndrome kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting to, and that's
Yeah.
what somebody had told me as I was trying to contemplate this, is how it came about. I don't know if that occurs in 12 hours, and that's why this is very problematic for me.
Her current relationship with the boyfriend in Vermont was already on shaky ground, as portrayed in the phone call where he says, "You always cancel on me. You always do this." So you knew they were kind of on shaky ground at first, but
He sounds like a controlling asshole.
Oh, he was. But she really did kind of jump ship, if you will, pretty fast.
Oh, yeah.
12 hours.
She sure did.
She sure did. I think she liked being tied up, to be honest with you. I think that really set it off for her.
But you never know what another person is attracted to. So maybe this is something that's been missing in her life, the excitement. I'm not saying being kidnapped and tied up or anything like that, but there was something exciting to her, I guess, about this. He also said things about the pictures. He was kind of maybe reading her very well. And maybe her boyfriend didn't appreciate her being a photographer, her in general. We don't know much about the boyfriend. And I'm not going to say he was a controlling freak because we don't know if she's been doing a lot of, he says, ditching him and stuff like that. Maybe he's not controlling. Maybe he's just frustrated with her by this particular point because it sounds like this is an ongoing thing. We don't know how long they've been going. And I don't even know if they're boyfriend, girlfriend, or if they're married. I mean,
no, they're not married. They're not married. They're boyfriend, girlfriend.
You brought up a couple of really interesting things that I want to touch on, Ken. And the first is reading people is Robert Redford's super spy ability. He's super spy.
Yeah, because he keeps on telling her that she's lying to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's uncanny about that. And it's funny because he gets duped a couple of times by people. But talk about being attracted. The thing that kept coming up in my mind, because I was wondering this, a very similar thing. Well, maybe she's on board because this is thrilling for her and she wants the thrill. And the only thing that could come up in my mind was Jamie Lee Curtis's character in True Lies, when she's taken in by Bill Paxton's character, the used car salesman who claims that he's a spy.
Yeah.
That's what kept coming into my mind. And I'm like, the movie's too serious for it to be that funny. It's awkward because he kidnaps her at gunpoint, nonetheless.
Right.
I don't know. It just, starting off with a violent interaction like that,
12
I have a
hours
hard...
later, they're in bed.
Exactly. Yeah. I have a problem with that.
I don't have the problem with the 12 hours. I have the problem that he left for a good portion of that 12 hours.
What did he tie her up with? Pantyhose? I mean,
Her
seriously.
nylons.
And she couldn't break that?
Very serial killer-ish, tying her up with her nylons.
But she couldn't break that? I mean, seriously?
But yeah, she's tied up and she's gagged and she's left alone for a number of hours as he goes to his friend's apartment to check on the wife and meets Jobert and they do their little thing there. And then he comes back and all of a sudden within 15 minutes, she's ready to go to bed with him. That's the problem I have. It's not the 12 hours. It's how the 12 hours is spent. It's very awkward.
It's very awkward, very out of place.
And the sex scene itself is just
hokey and cheesy. It's
bad. It's it goes between the pictures and them having sex and the pictures. And the sex.
And for me, Ken and Ted, that is the worst part of the movie. That sex scene, first off, it's not needed. And number two, it's not that you're looking to, to have a hardcore sex scene, but the way it's portrayed is so cheesy and so stereotypical 70s kind of. I mean, it was just out of place, not needed. And you've got two of the biggest stars of the mid-70s doing this, and it just didn't need to be done. In my opinion, it hurt the movie.
And what led up to it? I mean, it was really weird. I mean, he's like, I just want to feel normal. And he was just telling her about these things. And she's like, well, I guess for you to be normal, I'm going to let you rape me. Or
it's kind of what it is.
Your way with
borderline. And it even has the cheesy sex scene music.
Yes.
That's what took me out of the movie completely right there. The moment that music started,
you were in a 70s porn film.
Took me immediately right out of the movie.
You guys are better than this. Come on.
That's exactly what I thought. It's like, while she, I guess, gives consent, it's still a little rapey. It's still a little creepy. He had just had her tied up in the bathroom, like you both had said. It just comes off icky.
No, it was dirty, but it wasn't rapey. It was like, you know what? Maybe she's in the S&M and bondage and it turned her on. I don't know, but it wasn't rapey. It was consensual. I mean, it was very
Um,
soft and
But
kind
look at
of
what they did the next morning. It wasn't like they woke up together. He's reading stuff and figuring things out, and she comes
coffee and
in. It's all awkward, and then they have these awkward jokes, and it just didn't feel right. I mean, it
no,
would
it
be
did
different
not.
if we see him the next morning. She's laying, with her arm on top of him or something like that, like they really like each other. But after the sex, you don't get that we're into each other type of thing. It felt weird.
It did.
You guys are right. I don't know. I think, like you said, Eric, it just didn't feel right. It doesn't feel like part of the movie. Part of it is the time. And like you said too, Ken, the time is not well spent. It's not spent providing a background where she could have seen the more human side rather than the spy side of him. He kidnaps her, takes her to the apartment, and then he ties her up and leaves her and then comes back.
The only thing I could say about that, Ted, is I noticed that, like, later on when she comments about his eyes, she doesn't say he has kind eyes. She says that they have truthful eyes, like they're able to tell the truth. Because he's been telling her these truthful things. Like you said earlier, he reads people perfectly. And I think that the fact that she mentions that with the eyes later on, this could work here, is because maybe she's turned on with the fact that this is a guy that tells the truth. And she says even, maybe that's something I need. And maybe that's why she's attracted to him and why she allows this to happen.
I think you just gave more of a background into the whole situation than what they did in the movie.
Well done, Ken. Well done.
It just leaves it very weird. And then the fact that she is going to help him
Risk her life. Right?
exactly.
I mean, literally risk
Yeah.
getting arrested, killed in this huge espionage plot with the CIA. And she's just like, oh, yeah, I'll help you. No problem. Sure.
But
Yeah,
it's her
there's-
attitude, though, that's kind of strange about this, because she never gives into it fully. It's like she doesn't get excited about doing these things. At least it doesn't appear it. It seems like she's half willing to do it. It's just kind of strange. I love the scene with her and Higgins in the restaurant. She looks like she's having fun with that. But outside of that, she's like, I don't know if I want to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. I would think I would have bought it a little bit more if it made her excited. Like I saw her get giddy, like she's going to go in there and try to make this happen. But I'm not sensing that. I feel like he's like thanking her to going into Higgins' office to see who Higgins is, and she just kind of is playing like, yeah, I guess I have to do this, type of thing. And I get mixed vibes on it. And maybe that's what they wanted, but it's just really strange.
It's a very odd thing because there's not a lot of establishment to her character, and I think that's what makes interaction with him just so bizarre, in my opinion.
Yeah.
One of the things, though, that I think that does work, and I think it's just a testament to him as an actor, is Max von Sydow.
Oh, clearly.
He's awesome. I mean, he is really good. Well, he's good in everything that he does, but he's perfect here. And I like the fact you don't hear him talk. When you see him, you know that's the bad guy.
He's like the gentleman killer,
Right.
Would you please step away from the window, please?
Yeah.
So I don't blow bullets through the window, but I'm going to kill you.
Right. He does more with his character than a lot of the other actors do with theirs in this movie. And I think that's a testament to him. I do like the fact that he plays this kind of a good / bad guy that you're not exactly sure whose side you're on.
Towards the end, you kind of like the guy, when they're walking to his car.
It's so weird, though.
Because he's the one who's responsible for killing all his friends.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, they're going to have like their own sitcom together. But one thing that I noticed the second time watching it around is when he kills his girlfriend. He actually, when she says, I'm not going to scream, and she goes, I know. When the shooting starts, he looks away.
Yes, he does.
He's not comfortable with it. For whatever reason, he doesn't seem to be comfortable with killing her. That's interesting because then later on, when he still can kill Turner, he doesn't do it, even though the contract is over. But in other movies, we see the guy who's, has a contract to kill you. He's just going to kill you because of the fact that now it's like he failed in his job, and he never fails in his job, and he needs to do it just to prove to himself that he's able to do his job.
He's the gentleman killer.
But it is weird. I mean, just the advice he gives them. I was waiting for him to offer him a stick of gum. It was really weird at the end how they went back and forth with each other. And I'm not sure if I liked it or not. I really don't know. I think it's one thing to release him and say, get out of here. It's another thing to please say, hey, have you thought about becoming an assassin? It has really great hours and, the pay is pretty good.
I think the reason why it works for me is because, like you said, he does look away and he doesn't actually kill anybody. He tries to kill Robert Redford's character.
Well, he kills Atwood at the end, obviously.
Right, he kills Atwood.
Yeah.
But as he's tracking and assessing Condor, I think he sees a lot of similarities between himself and him. And I think that is what works for me at the end when they're walking away and he gives him the scenario of what's going to happen. It was ironic to me because it sounds just like something right out of The Godfather. The fact that it'll be somebody who that'll do it.
I wish that was the way it ended, though. I wish at the end that a car would have pulled up and it was Kathy. And Kathy had that smile and offered him to get in the car.
Sidebar, guys, that line is used in Seinfeld.
Yes.
Yep.
That is something that
Newman's driving the post office truck,
Right.
talking to Kramer because it's a great episode, and
it's one of the iconic
I'm
episodes.
a huge Seinfeld nut, so I just wanted to throw that in there.
I really would have loved to have seen the Kathy character. Maybe at the end, a little twist there to find out that she was also an agent. Because Jobert actually says something to him like, why did you pick out her? And I was hoping that he said that because he knew that she was also a spy. Why did you trust her? And it would have been nice to see at the end, like her offering him the ride, and then it ends there. We don't see her killing him or anything like that, but it ends there. With the thought was she in on all this, or was she just an innocent bystander and just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? I would have loved to see that.
I agree. That would have provided so much more substance to her character and why she reacts and does the things that she does throughout the movie. Whereas we're left with her leaving to go to Vermont, and it just seems weird.
Yeah, a little bit.
Throughout the whole movie, that's what I'm hoping. I'm watching this movie hoping, I hope she's like on the bad side. I hope she's going to maybe possibly kill him at the end. The fact, like you said, everything points like the way that she like says things to him and the fact that she has sex with him right away and just her attitude in general was one that it seemed like she was a plant or somebody that was playing a role. I mean, what happens to her? I mean, she knows all this information too. Isn't somebody going to try to kill her as well at the end here? It's not just the Turner character. Kathy's character also knows all this stuff too. So her life's in danger as well.
Yeah, we're supposed to think that Higgins is going to just let her off the hook here.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of unanswered questions here.
It leaves a lot more, too, but I do like the fact that they incorporate the New York Times because for the longest time, it was found out that the CIA had infiltrated the New York Times. And it's interesting that in 1975, they would have copped to that in a movie. They've been known to plant stories and things in the Times.
Sure. Well, it's post-Watergate. So, I mean, the timing of the movie, obviously, it's a different time. America's got a president that just resigned. You had almost 3 years of corruption on the TV as Watergate unfolded. The spy thriller, perfect timing for anything involving the CIA or a political thriller. And you've got two of your biggest stars of the era, which are not bad at all.
Because this was a book, 6 Days of the Condor, and within 2 years of the book being published, it's already a movie.
Right.
And that was unheard of in that day of age where a book would turn into a movie that quickly. And that's probably because of the political unrest that you were just talking about.
Oh, sure.
Let's talk about the real life circumstances around this movie, because we just touched on the fact that the New York Times was known that the CIA had planted stories in the Times, but also too, like you said, Watergate was also going on. So the distrust of the government was at an all-time high here. But the thing that fuels the whole movie that probably should have gotten more of a highlight in the movie was the fact that this is about oil in the Middle East. Now, we had just come off of the oil crisis.
The embargo in
1973.
Yep. Big.
So this is all very timely, and ironically enough, you had mentioned in some of the reviews that sounded more current. This is still all relevant.
Sure.
Ironically enough, in 2021, we are embroiled into the Middle East inexorably. We will never be able to untangle ourselves out of the Middle East because of oil. So in a way, this movie has a lot of real current issues that are still involved.
Definitely.
So, in talking about this stuff that surrounded this movie, one of the other things that came out around this time, and it really affected the FBI and the CIA to a certain extent, was the investigation into COINTELPRO, which was the secret program that allowed the FBI to infiltrate domestic groups.
Like the Black
And
Panthers, stuff like that.
right. And they also used COINTELPRO to investigate and wiretap individuals as well, like Martin Luther King Jr.
Sure.
That all came out around this time too. So around the time when the movie's being written, this is at a height of paranoia as far as our government goes. I think that really comes through in the movie pretty well. What do you guys think?
Oh, clearly. The stability of the government when this movie was in production and released was just at an all time high of no stability whatsoever. People had no trust in politicians at the time. Even the new president, Gerald Ford, they had no trust in him either. And he was a pretty nice guy. It's crazy that the movie itself, you've got your big names. You got Redford and you've got Faye Dunaway. So, right there, with those two names, people are going to go see the movie. You throw in Max von Sydow and Cliff Robertson. That's just icing on the cake there. The movie itself, it just could have been so much more, especially with all the political upheaval of the time. They really could have worked some stuff in to make it a little bit more to the time. Maybe weave in some more CIA stuff,
Maybe
more
tie in
FBI
the
stuff.
John F. K. assassination, maybe tie
Well,
in.
I don't think you need to go JFK, or the moon
Well,
landing or
I don't
something.
think the second Senate inquiry, I think that was in 78,
But
where,
Sidney Pollack said when he made this movie, all the factors around the political unrest had nothing to do with the movie. He made this movie
wow.
as to be a spy thriller, political thriller, spy movie, however you want to call it. All the other stuff around it had nothing to do with it. Which, you know what? Subliminally, I'm sure it probably kind of went into the psyche, but he says it didn't. He says this is just a movie that he did based
Yeah,
on the
so
book.
As far as the John F. Kennedy thing goes, it was in 1978, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and they're the ones that came out and said and agreed that there was a conspiracy, essentially refuting the
Report.
Warren report.
we weren't adults in that time of age, so we really wouldn't know what public opinion was, if there was some determination that Lyndon Johnson was in on it, or the CIA, or anybody else. I mean, we don't know if there was like rumors, going
We're
around.
talking JFK now?
We're just talking about the political things because there's a lot of political things that have gone on over the last decade while this movie's happening. You got the assassination of both Kennedys, the assassination of Martin Luther King, like you just said, Watergate. You had the Vietnam War going on. There's just so much unrest that it plays right up into this point. So it's not JFK related, per se, but I mean, there's just so much going on up to this point. But I do agree. I think there could have been a whole lot more in this movie. I mean, everything about Robert Redford's character I love. He acts this perfectly. Some of his reactions to things are just amazing. When he walks in to find everybody dead, the way he goes about it, I think is just perfect. The only thing I had a problem with him finding everybody dead is, even for a 70s movie, this is the least amount of blood that I have seen when people get shot with a machine gun.
And they automatically drop dead at the first shot.
Right.
You automatically hit the heart or the arteries. They just all drop dead
Right.
on initial shot, which is a little hokey.
There's 5 shots. It's kind of like spread through, but I don't.
But you're not going
You
to
would think
initially
that
kill everybody.
the thing that kept going through my mind when he went in to find everybody dead was, why is he leaving fingerprints on everybody? That's when I first watched the movie. I'm like, they're going to pin this on him. That's what I initially thought. He's going to get pinned for killing these people because he touches every single dead person and he runs away with the gun. I don't know. That was a little unbelievable. But I wanted to touch back on, I can't believe that Sidney Pollack would have said that the turmoil of the day would have had nothing to do with the movie. I find that very disingenuous because
Yeah.
without all of these things circulating around the movie, who would have ever have thought that oil was going to be the part that was going to help lead to destabilize the Middle East? Up until 1973, nobody would have really thought that that was even a remote possibility. And that's the crux of what the whole movie's about. That and the CIA saying that we're providing what Americans want, even though they don't know it yet. I think that overarching thing is one of the other two themes here. I find that very shocking that he would have said that.
I mean, it depends on how close is this to the book. I mean, I don't know if anybody did any research on the book.
The book is different. It's close, but it is different.
It misses 3 days.
It's 6 days, yes.
Yeah.
The book goes in a little bit of a different direction. It doesn't have to do with oil, actually.
Interesting. Do you know what it has to do with?
I'll be honest, I have not read the book, but I was reading the biography of it.
John F. K.
It's not JFK.
It's not JFK.
It's not a show.
Calm down there, Kevin Costner.
Yeah, really? And I thought I was a conspiracy theorist here.
I want to talk about JFK. We'll talk about Oliver Stone in another episode.
I know the book 6 Days of the Condor had several sequels. It was a big novel by James Grady, and it spanned 2 or 3 other books and some TV shows, if you will.
But based on what Ted was saying, though, and I kind of agree here with Ted, based that it wasn't about oil in the book, who's throwing the oil into this movie?
The book plot is it's revealed that the rogue group was using the section where Robert Redford's character works, they call him Malcolm in the book, to import illegal drugs from Laos. The supervisor stumbled onto a discrepancy in the records, exposing this operation, thus necessitating the section's elimination. So they were using his outfit to funnel drugs from Laos.
So they were doing one of the other CIA's biggest things, which is drug running. That is something that is widely known. That has such a broad net. Yeah, that's interesting. I understand why they didn't go into that, because it's only now that in the last probably 15, 20 years that we've come to understand exactly what the CIA's role was in running drugs into the United States from South America and then Central Asia, which would Laos and Cambodia and places of that nature. All you have to do is a quick Google search and you can see a whole bunch of different things that are tied to that. Another good movie that was made about something like that was American Made with Tom Cruise.
Yeah, with the drug running.
With the drug running, he works for the CIA.
Ted, are you familiar with the family jewels for the CIA?
It sounds familiar.
Family Jewels is the name of a set of reports that details sensitive activities conducted by the CIA, considered illegal or inappropriate. These actions were conducted from 59 to 73. The CIA director, William Colby, pretty much doing everything there. So the movie itself here says some critics also describe the film as a piece of political propaganda, as it was released soon after the Family Jewels scandal came to light in December of 74, which exposed a variety of CIA dirty tricks, which we talked about earlier. However, in an interview with Jump Cut, Pollack explained that the film was written solely to be a spy thriller and that production on the film was nearly over by the time the Family Jewels revelations were made. So even if they had wanted to take advantage of them, it was too far late in the filmmaking process to do so. He said that despite both Pollack and Redford being well-known political liberals, they were only interested in making the film because an espionage thriller was a genre neither of them had previously explored.
That's very interesting. Some of the stuff that came out in that would have, I know Ken's going to be really excited, would have taken in like the Kennedy assassination with E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy and those men, who then ironically went on to work for Nixon. They were part of CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President.
Which is such a great acronym, too. It's one of my favorites.
It's perfect. And it's one of those synergies that work in real life.
And of course, we've got Robert Redford starring in All the President's Men, talking about Watergate.
Which he was writing while he was filming this, which is just pretty ironic.
Crazy.
While they can say that the time didn't have anything to do with it, I think that's, I can't see where it didn't. Before this movie, I don't know if this movie is necessarily a big dark line where it's before this movie and then after this movie, like we've done with a couple of other movies, like especially like 2001, where things changed after this movie. Distinctly before this movie, spy movies were James Bond.
Yes.
This is completely different. This has a completely different feel. This is very political. This is very realistic type of spy movie that afterwards is different. After this movie and after the 70s, the spy genre changes a lot out of this.
Even the Bond movies change.
Exactly. They even become political.
Yeah.
And I think so to say that it's not of the time, I think they might have given that interview while they were in that moment, but now looking back, because hindsight's 2020,
Sure.
we can see that, it had a major influence on them. There is a point where it's before this time, spy movies were this. After this time, spy movies are completely different. And a lot of it is the distrust in whatever governmental agencies being targeted at that time. One of the other real life things that this is the first movie to touch on this, the world of hacking. This was the first movie that showed hacking. When he's manipulating the phone system, that was a system, it was called phone phreaking. That is where these people, what they would do is they would listen to the beeps, because if you press the number on the telephone or when you dialed it, each number had a different tone. And what these people would do is they would memorize the different tones and they would hack into the phone company. It was called phone phreaking. It's phreaking, it's PH is what they call it. And this movie not only put this out into the ether, so to speak, it shed a light on this, and it allowed for movies that came after it to show what hacking was. Take like Scanners.
How about
not Scanners.
another Robert Redford movie, Sneakers?
Sneakers, that's what I was thinking
Great
of.
movie.
And
No
and
secrets, Marty. No secrets.
even something like War Games too.
True.
This is a big thing, and one of the biggest criminals to come out of the phone phreaking and hacking thing was a guy named Kevin Mitnick, and his phone phreak alias was Condor.
Really?
He's notorious. He was one of the first quote-unquote hackers.
Was this before or after the movie?
After.
Very well played.
He was in the 80s and
Yeah.
early 90s. He was
Nice.
a huge phone phreaker. And then, of course, that is morphed into what we have today with hacking.
Mm-hmm.
He was a super freak? He was super
yeah.
freaking?
Right.
Super freaky.
But this is interesting because this was not something that a lot of people knew could be done at this time. This was not known. To look at it at the time, people would have been shocked by seeing that on film. Like when he records the beeps, and that's how he gets into the phone system. That's 100% accurate and real. That's pretty wild to think about.
And this is obviously well before the internet, where people can even research this stuff.
Right.
You can't just look up an article and go, oh, that's cool. What's he doing?
I had no idea that people even did this with phones.
Crazy.
Until I read, I believe it was an article in Rolling Stone that talked about the history of what hacking is. The first mention of the word hacker was used in reference to these phone phreakers, and it was in 1963 in an MIT student newspaper about hacking the telephone system.
Cool.
One of the people that was a technical advisor to Robert Redford was an ex-CIA person. So that makes a lot of sense as well. Nobody has any comments about phone phreaking, huh? I guess I'm the only one.
I think it's really cool. I knew it was real. I knew what he was doing was of the era and could be done. I did not know the term was phone phreaking. That's kind of pretty cool. It's amazing. I mean, you have all this stuff pre-internet. You know, you think that everyone just lived in like an archaic analog bubble before the internet, but there was shit going on.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's one of the things I really want to discuss is how this movie fits as far as the wider landscape of this genre of movies. Because it's not an action movie.
No.
Where it's blow 'em up and everything.
No.
And
it's a political thriller.
It very much lies into that spy thriller genre. How does this movie fit for you in that genre?
I like it as a spy thriller. Whenever I'm looking at a movie of an era, I always look at it, my era glasses on, if you will, my 75 glasses on. And I think for the time, this movie is really good as a spy thriller. I like all the code names, the cloak and dagger. I like the way the shooting is done. You know me, I'm a cinematography guy, and I love the cinematography in this movie. I think it's done really well.
The real places in this movie help it a little bit because these are real locations. I watched something on YouTube that showed what those places look like now, and I think it's nice to be able to relate to a place and know that, like, the corner deli that he went to get the food is a real deli there, and at the place that they worked at where they read all those books and magazines, that was a real location. It's not a set. I can appreciate a movie for that. I think it works fine as a political thriller, but I still think it's 1975. Don't have the ability to go watch this on DVD or streaming services or even a VHS copy, because at 75, it was really expensive to own a copy of a movie. I'm surprised that people like this movie as much as they did in 75 because of the fact that I missed a lot. And I like to think of me as somebody that when I watch a movie, I see things. And I get things. And in this movie, I missed a lot the first time
Well,
around.
you got to remember, Ken, you didn't have all your CG. Okay, things were more realistic. One of the biggest movies of that year was also Jaws. Jaws had the mechanical shark. There was nothing CG in that movie. So when you're trying to do a comparison of people, you have to look at it from their point of view of the era. You can't compare it to Marvel movies or DC Comics or anything
And
with a lot of
I
CG.
don't think I am. I watch political thrillers, and they have nothing to do with the DC or MCU or whatever is out there. I'm treating this as a political thriller. If you don't pay attention for even the minor things, you're lost in the movie, and you can't go back in 1975.
You have to go to the theater and watch it again, which is what people did.
For me, and I'm pretty sure that Ted would follow me on this, if it was 1975 and I went in to watch this movie one time, I'm not coming back to this movie again because it doesn't give me enough information at the beginning for me to watch for things. I feel like I just missed a lot, and maybe just me, but
No, you're right. One or two times I watched this thing, I missed a lot. I watched this movie twice this week, and I watched it specifically because I knew how obviously the plot and everything goes, but I watched it more for detailed lines and little things that give kind of precursors to how the plot rolls. And there were some new things that I discovered. So, yes, you're absolutely right. This is a movie that you watch it the first time, you're kind of just looking at the whole picture. You're not looking at it for details. And if you try to explain it to a friend of yours, you'd be like, well, it's this, that, and the other. And you're not going to go into a lot of detail because it's a movie that you have to see more than once to really understand all the plot twists and all the idiosyncrasies of this plot.
I think it's also a little just too slow in general. As much time as they've taken to do absolutely, I think, nothing in the first 15 minutes, of the film, until everybody gets shot, it's just kind of like, okay, what's going on up to this particular point? We haven't talked about John Houseman. I love John Houseman. I love The Paper Chase. I don't understand why he's even in this movie.
Because he is a name.
I understand he's a name, but it's just a waste of space in this particular movie. I love John Houseman, and I think his performance is fine. It's John Houseman. He acts the same way in everything.
Pretty
But,
much.
yeah,
And he's got the bow tie on too. I mean,
yeah.
it's pretty much the same John Houseman. You're right. He could have been replaced with anyone.
Funny bit about The Paper Chase, the guy who's at the counter when Kathy Hale is buying some type of ski, like wear or whatever the case may be, the guy behind the counter is actually one of his students in The Paper Chase, which is
Oh,
kind of...
look at that. How about it, huh?
But I just feel like this movie has a lot of wasted space in it where it could have been invested better. I would have probably liked to seen, let's say, Kathy Hale's character start off the film and she's having something going on with her boyfriend. And we find out that maybe she needs more out of the relationship. She needs maybe more excitement or needs whatever the case may be. Something to set it up where later on when she gives it up to Turner, we understand why. But we don't get those type of things. There's just a lot of wasted space, especially in the first third of the movie.
No, you're right. That still goes back to being a very problematic part of the movie. And I do agree with you, though, too, Ken, is if this was a one-time showing of this movie, I don't know if I come back. the first time I watched it this week was the first time I had seen the movie. I was not pleased with it at all. I thought it was kind of a mess. But it's when I started to do the research and then I watched it more, it has established itself for me as it's the grandfather of a lot of movies. It took some guts to break the mold of a particular genre of movie because let's face it, it is a genre breaking movie. They're taking a huge risk. Now, at the time, is it really that big of a risk having Robert Redford star in your movie? Probably not. It's probably going to be a hit regardless because people are going to go see Robert Redford.
Let me ask you a question, Ted, because I'm going to go on a different tangent here because I think this is kind of interesting as I'm reading it. I'm not a real big comic book guy, so I'm going to default to you guys on this, but the Marvel Comics superhero film Captain America: The Winter Soldier
Winter Soldier
was inspired by this film. Along with the comic book source material, Robert Redford was even cast in the film as an homage. How does that play?
It's, yeah.
I've never seen The Winter Soldier, so...
The Winter Soldier is probably, and this can be argued, but it is definitely one of at least the top 3 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as far as movies go.
Not to go on the Marvel tangent, but I was just curious to how this relates to this movie.
It does. There's a lot of intrigue. You can tell that Robert Redford had his hand in bringing 3 Days of the Condor into the stew, I guess, what you could say. Because in The Winter Soldier is where they discover that Hydra is infiltrated in S.H.I.E.L.D. and the CIA and pretty much in every governmental agency. So this idea of a government agency inside of a government agency, that's definitely comes from 3 Days of the Condor.
Okay,
and that's all, and that is all over The Winter Soldier.
Gotcha.
Eric, you definitely need to see it because it is.
I might actually see it. Okay.
Yeah, Robert Redford plays a great role in that movie, and the whole movie is about intrigue. It's a very different Marvel movie than the other Marvel movies, and I think that's what people hold it up as so high.
Very cool. I'm going to check it out.
In my research, I had read that as well. And you can definitely see where that all comes from. This movie, like you just mentioned, it got itself into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Something about the staying power and the power of the movie, it resonates still years later. And even though there are some very problematic parts of the movie, and as far as even some of the characters, I think it does its job, and it really is a genre-breaking movie. Without this movie, I don't know, something like Sneakers or even a kind of a stupid movie, but like Swordfish or other like hacking movies.
Hackers?
Hackers, exactly. Or even political thrillers.
Here's a question, though, for you, Ted. But why isn't this movie then so well known now? To be honest with you, I don't think I even heard of it before we started doing the podcast. And I know people that I've talked to is like, I've never heard of that movie. And if this is like the first movie to bring this genre to life, why isn't it required, movie watching? Why aren't people saying, hey, this reminds me of 3 Days of the Condor? The only reason why we're saying that is because we reviewed the movie for a podcast.
Well, a lot of the articles that I've found, and this is part of the strangeness of the movie, because you're exactly right, because it finds itself all over pop culture, but yet it's not an icon of pop culture. And I think part of it is because of the problems with the plot and in the movie. But as far as the movie itself finds its way all over the place. And doing the research, you come up with hundreds of articles about how this movie has found its way into this movie or that movie. It's like, wow. I don't know why it doesn't show up on TCM, on Turner Classic Movies. I don't get it. Because this is a movie that I probably should have seen before this past week. Because did I hear of it? I had heard of it because I like Robert Redford. So I knew that the movie existed. But it was never one that I was told that I needed to search out.
Right. Nobody recommended it to you. Even when, like you just brought up about Turner Classic Movies, because I watch that a lot. When I mention Robert Redford movies to anybody that knows Robert Redford in my circles, Nobody knows who it is but Eric from Sydney
Yes.
Pollack. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for that, you might not even known about this movie either.
Well, I'm a big Robert Redford fan too, so I would have come across with Robert Redford, but still, you're right. For whatever reason, and I think you both hit the nail on the head, the plot is a little shaky. It's a little thin. It's definitely spread out. It goes into way too many directions without really tying it all together. And I think compared to a lot of other Robert Redford movies, it's just not on par.
It's unfortunate
It is
that
unfortunate, very unfortunate.
it's unfortunate that Robert Redford's in the movie, even though he makes the movie. This is not going to compare at all to other Redford movies.
No, it's not.
I mean, this is not The Sting. This is not Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This is not All the President's Men. But ironically enough, All the President's Men might not have been as intriguing outside of having this movie had kind of an influence on it because he was writing All the President's Men while he was filming 3 Days of the Condor. It's easy for this movie to get lost in his filmography because he's Robert Redford. I mean, there's no other way to put that. He is an icon. Like you said, Eric, it does go off in different directions and it doesn't really establish everything perfectly. I think at the heart of the matter, what makes it a good movie and one that is consequential is the elements of the movie. At its most basic level, it is groundbreaking in a way. Rather than getting focused on the details, which we have to do when we're talking about it and reviewing it, seeing it in the big picture, it really is. But as far as why it doesn't get its play on TCM or known in a cycle of like movie theater when we had movie theaters, when they would do a run of a particular actor, I could see where this gets lost.
That's probably because it's a shadow of All the President's Men. To be honest, All the
Well,
President's Men is a bigger film.
All the
And
President's Men
it,
made a
it
$250 million in the box office. I mean, this isn't even on par with it.
this is just my personal opinion. It has the fan percentage that it has because at the end of the day, it is enjoyable.
Ted, I think one of the things we said prior, I think we all agreed on this, and I think it really boils back to this, is to really enjoy this movie, you need to see it twice, at
Yeah.
least. You have to see it twice.
what you're saying there, Eric, makes sense because let's say just a person I know, I recommend this movie to him. He watches it one time and then he's like, you know what, I didn't like it. And so that person's not going to recommend it to somebody else. So I think it's the fact that if somebody watches this only one time, they're not going to recommend it. It's not like watching like Airplane where you laugh really hard at the movie and then you go, hey, you got to see this movie. It's really funny. Or movies of that kind of nature. This is not a movie you recommend after one time seeing it. I think this is why it suffers.
It's sad, but it's true. You're absolutely right.
Mhm.
It is a movie that I remember the first time I watched it, I said, I don't know about this one. But with all movies of my director and Robert Redford, I watched them numerous times and then I got to understand it. But for someone else, especially in 2021, you recommend this movie to someone who's never seen it, they're probably not going to get past 20 minutes.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
After we watched it the first time, me and Ted were on the phone with each other and be like, I don't know how to feel about this. I originally said that I don't hate it. I don't like it either. And I think Ted had kind of a similar type of reaction to it. And I'm wondering if more people have that type of reaction to it. That's why it's not as well known. And I was saying, why did Eric pick this one? We should have went with Out of Africa, for crying out loud. And then, but to be honest with you, after watching it 2-3 times, I'm actually very happy that we did this movie. I actually have come to appreciate it to a certain extent.
I can honestly say this movie, of all of the Sydney Pollack movies, and probably a lot of other movies out there, there are very few movies that I think need to be watched twice to understand. All the other Sydney Pollack films, you can watch it one time and really just understand it, no problem. This one is a little trickier, and I picked it because I wanted to kind of have a variance of films. I didn't want to have all the same type of style. I wanted variety. And I'm really glad that we kind of reviewed this one and really dissected it, really have come to terms with it. And it's very ironic. I was always curious what you guys would think initially because I knew neither one of you had seen it. It's kind of funny that we were all on the same page the first time we saw it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of other people would be too.
Well, before we get to the end where we give our final reviews and letter grade, there was one last little tidbit that when I found it in my research, there's no way I couldn't mention it here. Cliff Robertson, who played Higgins. Higgins's office is in the World Trade Center. And I didn't know this, but Cliff Robertson was an aviator. And on the morning of September 11th, 2001, he was actually flying in his Beechcraft Baron over New York City. And he was directly above the World Trade Center when the first plane hit the World Trade Center.
Did he witness it from his plane?
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
That's one of the last things that I want to say about the movie in general here. A lot of this movie takes place in and around the World Trade Center.
It's kind of awkward watching the movie because the show, The World Trade Center, we watch it with eyes of after 2001.
Sure.
And it's heartbreaking to watch it because they show shots of them looking out the window of the World Trade Center and thinking, was somebody in that same room when everything fell down? It was hard to watch it.
It's very hard to watch any movie. It's got the World Trade Center in it now, or TV show.
And when Faye Dunaway's character is in the World Trade Center and Robert Redford's character is on that viewing platform overlooking the bank of elevators. I don't know either of you have seen, there was a documentary film crew.
I own it.
That was from France.
Yep.
It was that particular viewing point where Robert Redford's at is where a lot of their footage came from. It's chilling. It's eerie because this was the only movie ever to be shot inside the World Trade Center.
Was it?
And we had discussed this off before we started recording. The World Trade Center was pretty much just done when this movie was recorded. Having that as kind of an end to our look at the movie, it's hard to see those buildings in there. They were monuments to New York. That was a tidbit about Cliff Robertson that I had, not having seen this movie. I'm glad I saw this movie just to get that one tidbit, but I wanted to make sure I shared that with you guys.
It's very sombering.
Yeah. Well, as we come to the end of our discussion of 3 Days of the Condor, we're going to give our final reviews and letter grades. Do you want to go first, Ken?
Sure. 3 Days of the Condor. Whenever I review a movie for a podcast, I review it at least 3 times. The first time for just enjoyment's sake. I don't take any notes. I don't write anything down. I sit down with some popcorn and I watch the movie. I really didn't want to watch the movie the second time. I forced myself to watch the movie the second time. And how I look at this movie is I look at it as a record of an artist that I like a lot. The first time I listened to that record of an album I've been anticipating for it, it doesn't work for me that first time around, but I had to listen to it again because it's my favorite artist. So I listened to it again and I find more and more things I like about it. And I listen to it again and I find more things I like about it. Same thing with this movie. It's like a record to me. After I watched it the first time, I was frustrated with it, but I went back to it because, well, we're doing a podcast. And I found the second time around, I started seeing things that I didn't see the first time around, and it made it more enjoyable. And then the third time I watched it, I even said, oh, I even like it even more because I even found even more things. And then I was enjoying the performances even more. I think Robert Redford hits a home run here with his performance. The way that he acts, and I know this is saying a lot because he's done a lot of wonderful films, I think this is his best acting. I really do. I think when he is nervous, when he's on that phone call the first time, calling in to the CIA, telling them that everybody has died, I believe that he's nervous and frustrated and he doesn't know what to say and what to do. And he sells it really well. I had mentioned earlier, he sold it when he saw all his colleagues killed. He continues to sell it throughout the whole movie. And Faye Dunaway also does a great job. I'm not a big Faye Dunaway fan, but I really enjoyed her here. I think we could have used more background of her character. I think it would have made the character more interesting, but the acting here kind of saves the character. If I were just to grade this on the first watch, I was looking at C-C. After a couple more watches, I've upgraded to a B-. I told Ted earlier, after I watched the first time, I have no desire to watch this movie again after our podcast. That has changed. I'm going to say a B- right now, but there is a chance that this grade is improved with more watching. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Ken. Eric, how about you?
I like what Ken said there about a record. I think that really hits it home with me too. The first time I saw this movie, I was really kind of disappointed. I didn't know what direction it was going. I didn't understand the movie. Therefore, I could not enjoy it and I had to watch it numerous times to really get into it, really understand it and really enjoy it. It is kind of like a record from an artist you really like. And the first time you hear it, you're not sure, but under different circumstances you hear it or you watch it, it grows on you and you really learn to appreciate it. When it comes to this movie, I don't think this is Robert Redford's greatest performance. It's definitely up there, but I don't believe it is his greatest performance. I am a huge Faye Dunaway fan, borderline infatuated with her for her 1970s roles. But in this movie, I have to say I'm not too crazy about her. I liked her kind of midway towards the end when she was working with Turner and working with Higgins, kind of setting Higgins up. Prior to that, like the abduction and kind of being in the apartment, I wasn't really too crazy about her. I was kind of like not really sure where this is going and I really don't care.
Totally
So,
agree with you, Eric. When we get outside of her apartment, I love her character.
yeah,
She changes when she puts the hat on.
that beret style thing. Yeah.
Yeah, before she goes into the building, there's this look on her face. It changes her demeanor, and I kind of fall in love with her the rest of the movie. I don't like how they make her exit the movie, but up until the exit, I'm really enjoying her.
Agreed. Yeah, the exit, all of that. Yeah, I really would have liked to know what happened to her after. And then a little bit more before. I think we could have built on that. I mean, the running time in this movie, I want to say was an hour 55. There was a few things that probably could have been cut out, added in. When it comes to the movie itself, like I said, I am really big into that cloak and dagger stuff. After all the people were killed and they kind of had the communication between the phone, the people on the phones all through the CIA and how they transferred everything and all the cloak and dagger code names. I love that stuff. I could eat it up all day. The movie itself has really grown with me over the years. I've really come to appreciate it a lot more. And I'll be honest with you, the podcast today and listening to you guys really dissect this and go into it deeper has really caused me to really rethink the movie itself for the merits, especially when it comes to Sydney Pollack directing it. You really don't see Sydney Pollack's directorial style in this movie, but it is a Sydney Pollack movie, so therefore it falls into the category. I'm going to agree with Ken on this one, and this movie for me is a B minus. But unlike Ken, I don't think it's ever going to go higher than a B minus. I don't think rewatching it, I'm going to go with a higher grade. I've seen it probably 15 times, to be honest with you, and I appreciate it more and more every time. But not to the point where it's going to go to a better letter grade. Really, what you have is what you have. And once you watch this movie 3, 4, 5 times, I'm not sure you can get any more out of it. So for me, it's a B minus.
Thanks, Eric. This movie, I think we've beat it into the ground that you need to see it more than once. After the first time I saw it, I did not feel the movie. I didn't get it. Well, I mean, I got it. I just didn't get even why it was made. I didn't care for it. It was doing the research. It was looking at the movie in a bigger picture. It was seeing it the second and third time. Was the performances. You can really, in my opinion, you can really never go wrong with Robert Redford. He's amazing, and Faye Dunaway is great as well. The movie itself is very interesting for me now because it's consequential, and I would have never have thought that before. And this is one of those times where I actually have caught myself thinking, why didn't I see this before? Because this has a lot of the elements of movies that I like, and this initiated some of those elements. I find myself kind of confused by all of those emotions going into it. This is a movie that definitely have to watch it more than once. I hope that's something that doesn't turn people off. I'm saddened that this doesn't probably get the treatment on special channels like Turner Classic Movies. This movie matters. It's a good movie. It's very enjoyable. It's very watchable. I do have to agree with Eric. When I give my grade, I don't foresee this movie rising above my grade, but my enjoyment of the movie will change and will get better because this is a movie that I will watch again. To have that sort of a transformation in a matter of days is a testament to the movie. My final grade is going to be a C plus.
Oh.
The reason I'm just a little bit below you guys is because I do have the problem with Faye Dunaway's character. I don't like how it's set up. Instead of making her substantial, they kind of make her just the girl that helps Robert Redford's character. I think that does a disservice. I have a whole problem with that sequence. In my opinion, that hurts the movie. And that's why I'm a little bit below everybody else here. Ultimately, will I rewatch the movie? Of course. This is a good popcorn movie. If you want to grab a bag of popcorn and sit down and watch this movie, very entertaining. I don't see how anybody who likes the spy genre would not enjoy the movie.
Yeah, especially when you have a movie that's completely filmed off sets. It's in real live locations. You got to appreciate that for the cinematography itself.
I completely agree. So, guys, I think that wraps up our discussion of 3 Days of the Condor. Ken, can anybody find us on Facebook?
You can find us on Facebook. We're called The Movie Marquee. We also have a Gmail account, themoviemarquee@gmail.com. If you want to send us an email, let us know what you think about us also on our podcast sites like Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We do record through Anchor, and if you go through Anchor, you could also leave us a voice message, which we may or may not play on one of our episodes down the road.
And of course, you can also find us on Twitter. We are at the movie_marquee with 2 E's. And we have a little discussion group going on where we will be in contact with people, and we do interact with people on Twitter. So, guys, I think that's going to wrap us up for 3 Days of the Condor. What's on the marquee next, Eric?
Well, we are going to be reviewing the third movie in our Sydney Pollack series, the 1982 comedy release Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman.
I can't wait for that. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and I'll see you at the movies.
We'll see everybody. Thank you.
We'll see you next time on The Movie Marquee.